remember those rough hands folded every night by the bed, long before I understood the words that my grandfather said. The room was small and quiet, only the ticking of the clock and the sound of faith being planted, one simple prayer at a stop. His hands were warm from working 40 harvests through the years, scarred by fences, hay and hard times, but never shaped by fear. When he bowed his head each evening, everything else seemed to wait, because even the strongest man I knew knelt before amazing grace. Looking back, I understand what I couldn't see back then. The greatest strength a man can show is knowing who his strength is in. The hands that taught me to pray never pointed toward themselves. They quietly pointed heavenward to something greater than this world. The hands that taught me to pray still guide me every day. Though they've been resting now for years, their faith never passed away. Now when I fold my own hands, I still see his. Time has a way of moving faster than a young heart knows. Children become fathers before they notice how life goes. Now my little daughter watches as I kneel beside her bed, repeating many of the same old words my grandfather once said. She reaches for my weathered hands before we close our eyes, trusting every whispered promise like children naturally do in life. And suddenly I realize the circle never ends. Faith keeps traveling forward from one generation to the next. The greatest family treasures can't be locked inside a chest. They're carried in faithful hearts and quietly passed ahead. The hands that taught me to pray never pointed toward themselves. They quietly pointed heavenward to something greater than this world. The hands that taught me to pray still guide me every day. Though they've been resting now for years, their faith never passed away. Now when I fold my own hands, I still see his. Someday these hands will grow older like every hand before, but I pray they'll leave behind something worth remembering for. Not wealth or fame or titles that time will surely erase, just children who know where to turn when they need God's amazing grace. The hands that taught me to pray are living through me now, in every prayer around our table, in every humble bow. The hands that taught me to pray still reach across the years, showing me that faithful love outlives every passing tear. Now every evening finds me kneeling just the same, thanking God forever for the hands that taught me to pray. The old rocking chair sat empty as the evening breeze rolled in, but the faith those hands once carried still lives within. Hadn't turned down Maple Road in nearly 20 years. Too many memories waiting there, too many unanswered prayers. The little white church still stood right where the highway bends, looking almost just the way I remembered it back then. The old bell tower leaned a little, the paint had started to fade, but somehow it looks stronger now than the choices I had made. As I pulled into the gravel lot, my heart began to race, wondering if there'd still be room for a man who'd lost his way. Some roads don't lead you forward, they lead you back to grace. Sometimes the longest journey is returning to one place, back to the little white church where my story first began, where Mama taught me how to pray, Daddy showed me how to stand. Back to the little white church where mercy knows my name. I came back carrying my failures, but I left without my shame. Now every Sunday morning feels like coming home again. Miss Evelyn still played piano, though her hair had turned snow white. She smiled the moment that she saw me, like no time had passed in life. Brother Thomas shook my hand and simply said, "Welcome home." No questions about the missing years, no judgment in his tone. The preacher opened up his Bible to the story of the son who wandered far before returning to the Father's open arms. Every word felt strangely personal, like heaven had prepared that day for one more tired traveler to finally find his way. Grace doesn't count the miles or keep a record of the years. It simply waits with open arms until the heart appears. Back to the little white church where my story first began, where Mama taught me how to pray and Daddy showed me how to stand. Back to the little white church where mercy knows my name. I came back carrying my failures, but I left without my shame. Now again. Now I sit beside my grandson in the very same old pew, watching another generation learn the things that carried me through. I finally understand the reason that little church never changed. It wasn't holding on to the past, it was faithfully guarding grace. Back to the little white church, where forgiveness never ends, where strangers become family and broken hearts become friends. Back to the little white church, where heaven feels so near, and every hymn reminds me the Lord has always been right here. Now every road I travel leads me back somehow to the little white church. The bell rang softly through the valley as evening settled low. I hadn't turned down Maple Road in nearly 20 years. I hadn't turned down Maple Road in nearly 20 years. Too many memories waiting there, too many unanswered prayers. The little white church still stood right where the highway bends, looking almost just the way the porch light burned every evening, long before the sun went down. Mama said Daddy left it on in case I ever came around. Years went by without a visit, too much pride to cross that drive. I kept telling myself tomorrow, while yesterday stayed alive. Every birthday came and faded, every Christmas slipped away. The road back home grew shorter, but harder every day. Still that old white farmhouse stood there, just beyond the county line, waiting like it somehow knew I'd come home in God's own time. Funny how love never hurries, it simply waits with open arms. Patient through the passing seasons, steady through the storms. God was waiting on the front porch before I ever turned around, before my tired heart admitted I was finally coming home. God was waiting on the front porch like he'd never left my side, with mercy in his hands and forgiveness in his eyes. Now I know his love was waiting long before I arrived. Daddy met me at the mailbox, didn't say a single word. He just wrapped me in his arms, the strongest prayer I'd ever heard. Mama cried beside the screen door, holding both her hands to her face, like she'd already thanked the Lord for this long-awaited day of grace. Inside the house nothing had changed, my picture still hung on the wall. Even after all those wasted years, they never gave up at all. That's when I finally understood what grace has always been. The love that never locks the door when prodigals come home again. Some lessons take a lifetime before they finally become clear. God never measures distance the way we measure years. God was waiting on the front porch before I ever turned around, before my tired heart admitted I was finally coming home. God was waiting on the front porch like he'd never left my side, with mercy in his hands and forgiveness in his eyes. Now I know his love was waiting long before I arrived. Now my own children ask me why that porch light stays on late. I smile and tell them quietly, it's a promise, not a mistake. Because no matter where life takes you, or how long you've been gone, this house and God's great mercy will always bring you home. God was waiting on the front porch through every season of my life, through every foolish decision, every burden, every fight. God was waiting on the front porch, and someday when my journey's through, I believe I'll see that same warm light shining bright and leading through, where the Father's arms are open and every tear is gone. God will still be waiting on the front porch. The porch light glowed against the twilight as the whip-poor wheels began to sing, and I finally understood home had been waiting for me all along. The old church filled up slowly on that cold November day. Friends came from every county just to say goodbye and pray. Daddy's Bible rested softly on the front pew where he'd sit, its pages worn from 50 years, the faithful hands turning them bit by bit. The preacher spoke of heaven and roads we'll walk again, but all I could remember was hearing Daddy say amen. Not loud enough to draw attention, never trying to be seen, just one quiet word of faith that always meant everything. Some voices never leave you, though the years may drift away. They keep speaking to your heart long after their final day. My father's last amen still echoes through my soul, like church bells on a Sunday morning, calling this wandering heart back home. My father's last amen still guides me when I pray, because faith doesn't end with goodbye. It simply finds another way. Now every Sunday reminds me his voice is still alive. Spring returned to the pasture, like it always somehow does. The cattle graze the same old hillside, just because life always was. I found his work gloves in the barn, still hanging by the door. And for a little while I stood there, missing him a little more. Then my little boy asked softly, "Grandpa loved Jesus, right?" I smiled and looked toward heaven as the sunset filled the light. I said, "Son, the greatest thing he left us wasn't this land or this old home. It was teaching us to trust the Lord long after he's gone." The older I become, the more one truth appears. Faith becomes inheritance, passed from year to year. My father's last amen still echoes through my soul, like church bells on a Sunday morning, calling this wandering heart back home. My father's last amen still guides me when I pray, because faith doesn't end with goodbye. It simply finds another way. Now every Sunday reminds me his voice is still alive. Someday my children may remember the quiet prayers I prayed, not because I spoke so perfectly, but because I walked in faith. If I leave them one true treasure when my own race has been run, let it be a life that points them to the Father and the Son. My father's last amen was never really his last one, because every life he touched keeps singing that same song. My father's last amen still reaches heaven's door, and every time I whisper mine, it joins with his once more, until that day in glory when we'll stand again as one, and together say forever, amen. The church bell rang across the valley as evening settled on the pines, and somewhere beyond the clouds I could almost hear
Daddy smile.
There's an old oak by the pasture, older than this family farm, standing through 100 winters, holding every summer's charm. Daddy carved our names upon it back when I was 8 years old. Said trees remember better than people long after stories grow old. We hung a tire swing from one branch, Mama spread quilts beneath its shade. Every Sunday after dinner, that's where half our memories were made. We thought those days would last forever, like children always do, never knowing time was quietly writing chapters we couldn't choose. Some places never really leave us, though the years keep moving on. They're carried safely in the heart long after they're gone. The old oak still remembers every laugh and every prayer, every hand we held together, every burden that we shared. The old oak still remembers, though faces change with time. Its roots still whisper stories that forever live in mine. And every breeze reminds me God never wastes the years. Daddy rests upon the hillside just beyond the little church. Mama still brings fresh wildflowers every Sunday after worship. Sometimes I sit beneath that old tree with my grandson on my knee, trying hard to tell the stories exactly how they came to me. He asks about the faded carving still visible through the bark. I tell him, son, love leaves its fingerprints long after life grows dark. Then we bow our heads together, thanking God for days gone by. His grateful hearts grow stronger the older they become with time. The older I get, the more I learn the richest life we'll ever know is measured by the people we love, not the things we own. The old oak still remembers every laugh and every prayer, every hand we held together, every burden that we shared. The old oak still remembers, though faces change with time. Its roots still whisper stories that forever live in mine. And every breeze reminds me God never wastes the years. Someday another little boy may climb those weathered limbs, never knowing all the blessings that once surrounded them. But maybe he'll still feel God's peace resting in that quiet place, because some roots grow deeper than anyone can ever trace. The old oak still remembers every generation's song, holding pieces of our family long after we moved on. The old oak still remembers, and somehow so does grace, because the love God plants in faithful hearts, time can never erase. Now every autumn morning, when the leaves begin to fall, I thank the Lord for the roots He gives that outlive us all. The evening sun slipped through the branches as the old swing gently swayed, and I smiled knowing some memories never really fade. Daddy said the fields won't wait, son, so let's get on our way. We'd bounce across those back roads with the windows rolling down, watching morning sunlight spill across the richest dirt around. He'd point toward the little church standing on the hill, then tip his hat for just a second before we'd cross the field. I finally asked him one July, "Daddy, why do you always do that?" He smiled and said, "'Cause every blessing starts with something bigger than this track." The older I grow, the clearer life becomes. Faith isn't separate from the work, it's the reason the work gets done. It's the tractor, the cross, and me, that's all I've ever really known. A hard day's work of faithful prayer, and a place to call my home. The tractor, the cross, and me through every season of my life. God has always ridden with me through the sunshine and the nights. Now every field reminds me His goodness runs this deep. Some years the rain came early, some years it barely came at all. But we watched good crops rise high and watched others simply fall. But Daddy never cursed the weather or blamed the Lord above. He'd say faith grows stronger in dry seasons, just like crops grow strong through love. Now that tractor's mine to drive, the seat still fits just right. Though Daddy's been with Jesus now for almost 5 long years tonight. Sometimes I swear I hear him laughing when the old engine starts to sing, and I realize some voices never really leave a thing. The harvest isn't measured only by the grain we bring. Sometimes it's found inside the hearts that faithful living builds within. It's the tractor, the cross, and me, that's all I've ever really known. A hard day's work of faithful prayer, and a place to call my home. The tractor, the cross, and me through every season of my life. God has always ridden with me through the sunshine and the nights. Now every field reminds me His goodness runs this deep. Now my little boy climbs beside me, just like I once climbed with Dad, asking why we stop each morning at the edge of the pasture grass. I smile and point toward the church, resting quietly on the hill, and then tip my hat the way Dad taught me, and probably always will. It's the tractor, the cross, and me, 3 things that shape my soul. A father's love, the Lord above, and honest work that makes us whole. The tractor, the cross, and me, we've got another generation too. Because faith is more than something spoken, it's something people do. Now every sunrise finds me exactly where I need to be, with the tractor, the cross, and me. The engine slowly settled into silence as the evening touched the land, and I thank the Lord for simple things that still make make a man who he is. Daddy always fixed the fences before he'd ever fix the barn. He'd say the little things you overlook can slowly do the biggest harm. So we'd walk that pasture every spring, hammer hanging from his side, checking every weathered post where the years had left their signs. He never hurried through the work, though daylight wouldn't always last, because strong things stay together when they're built to stand the past. Back then I thought he meant the farm, and maybe part of him still did, but now I know he was teaching lessons only time could help me live. Some truths don't bloom overnight, they grow with every passing year, like seeds planted in good ground, watered by faith instead of fear. That's where faith meets the fence line, in the little things we do, in every promise we keep, when nobody's watching you. Where faith meets the fence line, God quietly remains, holding hearts together the way old fences hold the plains. And every sunrise reminds me, love is built the very same. Daddy finally left this world, the farm became my own. Every acre held a memory, every field felt like home. One October afternoon, I walked those fences by myself, carrying the same old hammer that had rested on his shelf. I noticed one old cedar post leaning farther than before. It would have been easy to ignore and keep walking down the road, but I could almost hear him smiling like he used to years ago. Some strong lives are built by fixing things before they come undone. Funny how the smallest lessons keep growing through the years. The ones we hardly notice become the ones we hold most dear. That's where faith meets the fence line, in the little things we do, in every promise we keep, when nobody's watching you. Where faith meets the fence line, God quietly remains, holding hearts together the way old fences hold the plains. And every sunrise reminds me, love is built the very same. Now my boy walks right beside me with that hammer in his hand, asking questions I once asked, trying hard to understand. I smile and tell him softly, One day you'll clearly see, sometimes God teaches heaven's lessons through ordinary things like these. That's where faith meets the fence line, across generations still. Not inside the loudest moments, but through quiet strength and will. Where faith meets the fence line, His goodness always stays, building families one heart at a time, across these country days. Now every winding pasture still softly speaks His name, because faith still meets the fence line. The evening settled on the hillside as the cattle drifted home, and I thanked God for the simple places where faith is quietly grown.